We are going live.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name's Andy Jennings, and I'll be taking you through a discussion about how to get started with Azure and some of the things that a lot of people miss when they actually start moving into Azure. And once they're in there, there's things you can do to improve the posture of your Azure deployment. So let's just jump straight in. So we want to take you through a few things. There's a governance model that Microsoft has provided for everyone. And this is where a lot of people kind of take a misstep when they start moving into Azure. The governance model is very, very important to ensure that your foundation is created correctly and you can confidently move forward with your Azure implementation, right? And so when we talk about the Azure governance model, it's about securing your environment, connecting to the on-premises environment, how you're going to manage the environment. How are you going to set policies in the environment? And that's a really big piece here. How are you going to manage your cost? Do you have ways to automate deployments in the cloud? How are you going to manage identity? So all of these things are things that you actually need to think through before you actually make the jump to Azure. So I'd like to take a couple of seconds to just talk about who I am. My role here at CDW is a cloud solution architect. I mostly focus on Microsoft Azure. I've been working with Azure solutions since 2011, and I've gone through hundreds of deployments with customers, many of them when I was at Microsoft myself. And a lot of times customer had jumped straight in, doing the cool stuff, which is, deploying VMs or deploying services in the cloud and not really thinking about the management that really needs to go around it, right? So these are the things that we want to talk about today with you guys to ensure that you guys have a good understanding of what the base components are and what really needs to be thought about when you're moving into Azure. So we want to just talk about Azure governance. And this slide, I love this slide because this is what I get from a lot of clients. I'm going to the cloud, really concerned about how this is going to work, how can I ensure that I'm locked down? I'm apprehensive on, what security model I'm actually going to have in there. I'm anxious because now all of a sudden I don't have my servers locally anymore. I now have to rely on Microsoft to deliver the services for me. And I get a lot of unease from upper management that we're moving into this new model. Are you sure it's going to actually be a solid foundation for us to actually, run our business on, right? So these are things that I hear a lot. And so going through this governance model gives you the ability to actually take these concerns and apprehensions and move them to the side because you've taken this all into consideration and you've built this solid foundation for your Azure environment. So the first thing you want to talk about is base deployment. And so base deployment really means is how am I going to set up my actual subscriptions, right? Do I have an EA? If I have or an enterprise agreement. If I have an enterprise agreement, perhaps I want to do things in a certain way. Do I have a single subscription? Am I looking at multiple subscriptions? Do I have a lot of clients have multiple subscriptions, meaning the production subscription, then a QA subscription, and an app dev or test dev type subscription, right? And then we need to understand how is it we're going to actually set those up, who needs access to what, and how are we going to make sure that those services can flow back and forth between those different subscriptions. So the one thing that we want to talk about is the hierarchy, right? So how is it we're going to do it? How are we going to manage it? Do departments own it? Is just an account owner? Is there one person who's your lead who's going to actually own all of the subscriptions? who needs access to your test environment, who needs access to the production environment. And the beauty here is less is more, right? So I had one client who actually deployed Azure in their environment and then basically gave everybody in their environment access as an owner, which is basically the top level rights or administrative rights to the subscription. So they had 330 people who could actually go in there, modify their environment, do whatever they wanted basically in there. And so these are things we need to think about and ensure that we give it only the proper amount of access to the people who need it. And then we do that using RBAC rules, right? So hierarchy and subscription creation, really key. That's the very base of setting up your Azure environment. And then we need to think about, okay, so let's figure out how are we going to control access? Do we control access at the subscription level? And then normally there are 3 roles that we really kind of deal with, and you see them here on the slide: contributors, owners, and readers. Those are the general ones that we use in most cases. There are about 100 other ones that provide specific access to specific things. However, generally we're talking about normally these 3 to manage the environment. So am I going to give someone the owner of the subscription role, right? So that means that they have the ability to basically do whatever they want in the subscription, deploy anything they want, add users, everything that's possible in the environment. Or am I going to provide them at an ownership at a resource group level? And the resource group level ownership is, say, for example, you have a networking group, and now you've moved all your network resources into a resource group. Well, you know what? I personally am not a super network guy. So I probably don't need access to that, right? I probably maybe would be able to read it, but they shouldn't allow me to make changes in that environment. So we can actually lock the environment down based on what's in each resource group. For example, I'm a SQL guy. So if you wanted a SQL resource group, then I could be an owner or contributor in that resource group, right? Or you could even get even more granular and actually put those roles against an actual resource itself, or an actual object. So if there was a database that you wanted access to, or a virtual machine that you needed full access to, you could provide access right to that bottom level resource. But the beauty of this is that we want to keep the number of roles that we're assigning to a minimum so that we can audit them. So we know exactly who is actually in these roles. And normally these roles are assigned through a security group, right? So we would assign the role to the security group and then add people to the security group. And that way we can actually understand who has what access to what. And then it's easier to chase back. You know, if something happened, then we can figure out who had access and to make those changes, right? So it's very important. So again, the subscription type, how you're going to deploy the subscription, how you're going to secure it based on role-based access, right? So then we talk about a little bit about resource groups. So what are resource groups? Resource groups are actually allow you to create a life cycle of a product. So for example, if you had an application that needed a database, a virtual machine, perhaps some storage on the back end, and then some sort of networking, you could bundle all of that application into one resource group. And then everything that goes on that particular app lives within the boundaries of this resource group, right? It's a very easy way to understand where all of the resources are for that particular application. Other people do it, like I mentioned before, where they take certain types of resources and move those all into their own resource group. Like I said, networking or databases or those types of things. It really depends on your business model and how you want to handle it. But the idea is that we want to make sure that we have an easy way of finding all the resources you have within Azure, because Azure can get stretched out. There can be a lot of resources in there, a lot of resources even just for one virtual machine, right? So we want to make sure that we know exactly where they are, how to find them, how to limit access to them, right? So that the whole idea there is using a resource group as a container for network services or database services or an application. That's the idea behind your resource group. And this is one of the big things that we see a lot of people kind of pass by on their way to creating their Azure subscription. And it's about policy management of the environment. So policies basically are JSON scripts that are either you can use the built-in policies or you can write your own, right? So they're definitely very simple to write. As you can see here, they're just a if and then statement, right, type of thing. If I want all of my resources to reside in Canada, right, then deny any request to build an application or build a service outside of Canada, right? So that's the biggest one we hear in Canada is I don't want any of my stuff built outside of Canada. All my storage needs to be in Canada. Everything needs to be in Canada. And that's a big one. And so we can easily create a policy called a location policy that basically has your data residency built in. So the idea there is it will deny the creation of anything outside of a data center in Canada. And that's a great thing to have, that people don't realize that Azure, when you first deploy anything in Azure, as you might imagine, because Microsoft's an American company, they default to the United States as the data center for creation of that object, right? So, and we've all gone through and done things quickly and missed things, and you can all of a sudden miss changing your data center from US East or US West to Canada, and all of a sudden you've said, okay, I'm deploying this resource is deploying in, US East, which is in Virginia, and you don't want that, right? So when we created a location policy, it will basically tell you, hey, you know what, you tried to deploy this outside of Canada, we're going to fail this. You need to go back and change the location for this, right? That's a huge one. There's also this other policy that I find that a lot of clients really need, and it's really the deny SKU policy. Okay, so in Azure, I'm just going to take virtual machines, for example. So in Azure, the virtual machine catalog is roughly about 300 different virtual machine types. And in most cases, most customers have no need for 99% of them, right? So they probably need maybe a half a dozen different virtual machine types. And so what we want to do is say, okay, the way we can control cost is by ensuring that we only are using these types of SKUs, right? We're only building these types of VMs. And by saving cost, what I mean is, if you have multiple people who are actually deploying into the cloud, you really are, and they have obviously the proper permissions and whatnot, you don't know what they've deployed until basically the bill comes in, right? So I had a client a few years ago who one of their developers decided to try a bigger, faster virtual machine to test the application they were writing. They were having some, trouble with the application. It's running slow. So they decided that they were going to choose a big honking machine in the cloud to try this out. Well, I got a call from the client. The client said, Andy, why did I go through my whole allotment of Azure for the year in 1 month? And I'm like, I don't know. That's a good question. Let's take a look. So we went in and realized that the developer had decided to turn on a machine that was a very powerful machine, 128 cores, 4 terabytes of memory, but it was $40,000 a month to run that. And they had not turned it off. right? So you want to avoid these types of things because Azure's going to do what you ask it to do. If you have the permissions to build that virtual machine, then it's going to do it because it's just a computer, right? It's going to answer your requests for you. So the idea here is to build in these cost controls, blocking out these crazy huge SKUs. But the idea, of course, if you need that SKU, then that's another thing, right? So we can obviously unblock that SKU, but in most cases, clients don't need those enormous virtual machines. And so we want to make sure that we're working with them to ensure that their costs stay in line. Does that make sense, right? And then policies can be inherited, right? So they actually flow through everything from the top down, or you can apply them at different resource group level. So each resource group can have its own policies, but you want to build like the location policy and the SKU policy and those at the top so that actually flows down through the whole Azure environment, right? But these are huge. Our team has the ability to help you understand what these policies can do for you, and basically, again, it sets the baseline for you and ensures that we're delivering what you need. Resources only in Canada, the right proper SKUs for you, the right type of storage, all of these things that you can build in at the policy level, and then you're in control, right? So you don't have to worry about every time checking every month that someone hasn't deployed some crazy server or some storage that you don't really want in there, right? So it's a big deal. This is a big part of making sure the baseline of your environment is solid. The next thing we want to talk about is tagging. So tags are a big part of this as well. A lot of times, if you have the strategy to have your resources scattered throughout different resource groups for one application, you need to understand what that application is and how I can find all of the pieces that are out inside my Azure environment. And so with the ability to put tags against these resources, it gives you the ability to actually be able to pull up a report on where are my apps or where are my resources and how are they costing, what are they costing me? And this way I can actually show, marketing, hey, you asked us to deploy this website, blah, 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 and I needed a database and I need this and that and the other thing. Here's how much it's costing, whether or not you charge them back or whatever it is. The idea is that you can show them the cost, how much it is costing them to do, or costing the company, I should say, to actually run that particular application, right? And the idea there is fantastic. It gives you the ability to easily understand where your components are, and you can pull up reports against all kinds of different information or different resources running in the cloud. And then also, as I said before, we had a policy. We can also set up a tagging policy so that all resources are required to have a policy. And one of the other ones that a lot of clients use a lot is the cost center. So they want to make sure that, hey, we're applying this cost center to whatever department it is. And then again, we can just kind of show them, hey, this is costing you X amount to actually manage that environment. This is a huge one for me as well. It's resource locking. A lot of people don't realize that you can actually do this, right? Well, it does sit there on all the resources pretty much, and it just says lock, right? And so why would I lock something? Again, as I said, I'm not the networking guy. I don't say I am. I letting Andy go in and changing your networking settings is probably a bad idea. But the idea here is I wouldn't mind going in to see them, right? If I needed to understand maybe what a subnet was or where my subnet was or what's available in a subnet, that type of thing. You could set it up so you can apply what's called a cannot delete or a read-only lock on this resource. And the beauty here is that because I don't have the permission to remove the lock, I can't do anything about it, right? Only the people who have the permission to remove the lock can remove the lock if they need to. And it's simple, right? I don't want this to be deleted. I turn on this lock type, do not delete, right? And this would be, I had, again, another client who had someone go in and actually delete a database from the environment. And they just basically went in and hit delete. And again, the system doesn't know you don't want to delete it. As long as you say, yes, okay, after the delete, you know, how it gives you the little warning, gee, are you sure? And you hit yes, boom, it's gone, right? And you want to make sure something like that doesn't happen. So you just, adding these locks just makes it so much easier to ensure that any resource that is critical to your environment, you can just put these locks on, very simple, and ensure that that resource is not disturbed, right? That's anything in production should have a lock on it in my mind. But in your test or development environment, perhaps nothing needs to have a lock on it. Everybody can do whatever they want, right? But these locks are very important to high value resources, right? Ensure that they're definitely locked down. And then, so are there any questions? Do we see any questions in the chat? There's, like, as I said, our team's very, very adept at working with your team, understanding your business process, and then ensuring that we rebuild the foundation of your environment in a way that suits your business, right? But those things are very So there's a question in the chat now. Is there a recycle bin? And there is not, is gone, right? So that's the key here, right? It's not like email, right? It doesn't have a administrator or recycle bin. It's basically gone, right? The resource data may be there in storage. The storage would still be alive. However, something new that Microsoft came up with is the ability to delete the storage along with the resource at the time of deletion. Early in Azure's cycle, the actual storage would not be deleted, and you have to go in and manually delete the storage. But now Microsoft gives you the ability, I should say, you have to check the box. But if you check the box and it deletes everything from storage as well, then it's gone, right? Totally, just so you're aware. And you'd have to restore from tape. That's, I guess I'm showing my age. You have to restore from backup, right? So that's basically the way that goes. So now the next thing we want to do is talk about operational excellence. So what we need to understand, because everything's now not in our data center anymore, right? There's no flashing lights, there's no nothing, there's all this stuff is running in the cloud. So how do we monitor it? How do we alert on issues that are happening in the environment? So Microsoft has got you covered there. There's about a dozen different things that Microsoft provides that allows you to monitor and alert against the environment. So application insights is one of the features that gives you the ability to actually look into web applications that you've created, and it will actually drill down and give you all sorts of metrics against what's happening with that application, and gives you the ability to actually set off alerts if something's going wrong with that particular application. Then we look over at infrastructure monitoring, and you can see there's a number of things here. So with log analytics, you basically set the logging of all the devices or all the services running in Azure. Excuse me, it creates a log, and then it gives you the ability to actually run reports against the log, so you can understand what's going on. Like, say, for example, you wanted to know what virtual machine is running underutilized, right? So I want to run a report that says, hey, I want to understand which machines, what the 95th percentile usage on these particular CPUs is, right? And then so when you get that 95th percentile, report back. It basically, you can then determine whether or not you need to up the number of CPUs or reduce the number of CPUs, that type of thing. And the idea here is that you just run a report and it basically will pull all that information back for you, right? And then we can talk about Network Watcher, which does exactly what it says, right? So it basically gives you the ability to look inside the network and what traffic's flowing, where the traffic's flowing, see if there's any bottlenecks in your environment. Then there's service mapping. Service mapping is a fantastic tool. It basically gives you a view of all of the services that are actually coming into or leaving a virtual machine. So if you have you can see like, here's my app front end, and here's my database, and you can see there's a connection back to the database, and then you can see connections to other components in your environment and determine, which systems are dependent on other systems. And that way you can perhaps move them closer to each other, that type of thing. Very useful. And then there's obviously other management solutions that you can go in and put in, like SCOM or something like that. Operations manager, that type of thing for a third party, right? If the third party thing is something you prefer. But basically, there's other tooling that you want to look at. So one's called Azure Monitor, and the Azure Monitor, it basically gives you the ability to set alerts in your environment. So the idea here is that I'm going to watch this particular CPU. I'm collecting metrics on this CPU, and if it hits, say, 90% for more than 5 minutes, alert me, because I want to know something's off, right? And so I can set all these alarms within my environment. I can get a text, or I can get an email, or I can get even a phone call. The cool Azure Monitor is pretty cool. It can actually call you and tell you that there's a problem, right? And that's a big deal for me. So because when I was an IT admin, when I wouldn't be checking my texts for something going wrong on the weekend, right? My phone is generally sitting on the coffee table or whatever. But if my phone rang, then I'm going to go get it, right? If you know what I mean. So if I didn't hear the text and then I was outside or whatever, I wouldn't know it was an alert came. But if I set it up so that it called me, then it would ring, right? And then I know that it actually happened. So very useful way to set things up. Then there's this thing called Azure Advisor. And the cool thing about Azure Advisor is it actually understands best practices of how people around the world have actually deployed Azure, and looks into your environment and gives you suggestions on how to actually make yours more best practices like. Obviously not all best practices suit everyone. However, it gives you an idea of what the rest of the world is looking at in an area environment similar to yours, right? And it gives you advice on what you could change. Like if it may also detect a system that's not being used, right? Hey, this system doesn't seem to be used at all. Or here's some storage that doesn't seem to be attached to anything. And so it'll tell you these things so you can go in and actually remove this stuff so that you can actually save some money. And then the last one here is Service Monitor or Service Health. And that's really a website that Microsoft provides, and everybody can actually they're saying we lost audio. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. I just got
Yes, can still see.
Okay. Yeah, so Service Health is a website that Microsoft provides that gives you the ability to actually go in and see where there's service issues within the Azure global environment. So it'll basically say, oh yeah, in Japan, there's such and such a service that's having an issue, or in Canada, for example, there may be a service that's having an issue. So if you guys all of a sudden detect that there's a slowdown or something like that, the first thing to do is go to the Service Health just to see if something is a global issue for Microsoft. and they'll alert it, and they update it. I think it's every like 10 minutes that they've updated it, right? So you'll know straight away if it's a service outage from Microsoft. But yeah, and then the idea here is that you can actually, as I said before, you can do alerting, you can create dashboards from the Azure Monitor, export your metrics, and then even look at the activity log, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But that basically is about what's gone on within your Azure environment in recent time. So next thing, again, remember we're building a foundation here, ensuring that your environment is good to go. When we think about moving to Azure, we're building a data center, right? So we need all of the components that are really as part of the data, any data center, right? So we obviously going to need some backup and disaster recovery. So Microsoft provides a few built-in tooling for this. So Azure Backup, as you might imagine, it's similar to Windows Backup, shall we say. I'm not going to say it's as feeble. It's much better than that. But the idea is that it gives you the ability to back up the environment and store it for long-term retention, right? So you choose your retention policies that you want. A lot of clients, I work with a lot of law firms, and they need to keep everything forever, right? Which is really amazing. And it takes a lot of storage to do that, right? So the nice thing about the Azure Backup is that it's doing forever incremental, right? So it's once you've got your first upload up there, then it's just adding changes, right? Changes, adds, deletes, all that type of stuff. And so you're, pardon me, once you get to a steady state, it generally just grows with the average of your storage growing over the year, right? A lot of clients are around 5 to 10% storage growth once they're at a steady state. And then there's this other component we want to think about called Azure Site Recovery, and this is the ability to actually recover from a failure. So this could be systems running on your on-premises environment, it could be systems running in the cloud. And then we want to make sure that these are, certain resources that can never go down in my environment, or I have an RTO or RPO that's really, really short, and I need to have these things back up as fast as possible. And so we can actually fail these from your on-premises environment into the cloud, or from cloud to cloud, or from data center to data center in Microsoft, right? So region to region, they call it. But there's a number of other things to think about this, right? So if I need to test something from my on-premises environment, without bringing it all down and without building a replica of my on-premises environment, if I'm using Site Recovery, I can actually replicate all of the systems I need into the cloud, and then I can turn on what's called a test. And once you launch the test, all of the virtual machines that you've replicated up to the cloud will come online, and now you can actually work with those virtual machines. And say, for example, you wanted to run a patch and see if this patch is going to blow things up, right? So you could bring up this test dev environment in the cloud, run some testing against the environment, and if everything's great, you just turn it off. All the virtual machines get basically shut down and wiped right back to the sink, the original sink, and then you're good to go with deploying the patch in your production environment. The next thing is cloud bursting. So if you have a type of business where, say for example, you're a SQL shop and you want to actually run, you're running SQL on premises, and you don't really want to buy some giant machine to run SQL, because you have a couple times a year where you actually need your SQL machine to be a lot more performant. The idea here is that you could have that replicating into the cloud, and then once the time came for that spike in your environment, you could cut it over, let it run in the cloud on a larger, beefier machine, so it can handle all the transactions that are happening. And then once the season's done, you can actually just close that down and it re-replicate it back to the on-premise environment, so you haven't lost any data. Just the beauty of that is that you don't have to buy all of this heavy equipment for on-premises use. You just use it as you need it, which is exactly what the cloud's been designed for, right? As you see, recovery, and then this tool, Azure Site Recovery, can be used to actually help you in the migration process of getting from on-premises into the cloud. Again, beauty of that is non-destructive process. We're basically taking your virtual machine and putting a copy of it in the cloud, and then we can basically say, turn it on, shut off the one on premises, ensure that the communication's all good, and we now migrated that into the cloud. But we always have the failback option of the virtual machine that was on premises could always come back online if something were to go wrong here, right? Then we need to think about the next step is deployment optimization. So how are we writing scripts to actually make sure that when I deploy a SQL server, is that SQL server deployed exactly the same way every single time? And if we do that, it's much easier to find issues, ensure that there aren't any issues when you're deploying a particular type of system in the cloud, right? So we basically create an ARM template, and then we can leverage that ARM template to recreate a resource the same way, the same time, over and over and over again, right? This also gives you the ability to actually recreate a test environment or something like that, right? Because now we have all these templates that I can use to just spin up a brand new environment. Or if my environment gets out of sync, I've got drift in my environment and I need to bring it back to center. You can use automation to redeploy the environment, right? And get back online quickly. So the next thing we want to talk about, hey, again, we're looking at building a data center, right? So what SLAs do you need? What's RPO, RTO? What policies do you need for your backup? That type of stuff, right? So again, these are things that we need to think about. And then when we're thinking about availability options, because now we understand what the requirements are, what are the options that are available to you? So if you have in Azure, if you have a single VM with just running on standard disk, there is no SLA in a single VM, right? However, if you deploy a single VM with premium disk, all of a sudden you have a 3.9 SLA, right? Something that really is very important. If you want to do multiple VMs in an availability set, it bumps you up to 995. And then if you use an availability zone, then obviously you're up to 4 nines, right? So depending on, you don't want to have to use all of this premium stuff for everything, right? You want it for things that are most important in your environment, and you actually layer on the SLA that's required for that particular item, right? It's very, very important, right? So if I have multiple VMs running an availability zone, and now I need a load balancer in front of those to ensure that if one of them goes down, the traffic will automatically move to that other one, and vice versa, right? So load balancing inside Azure is a free service. So any internal load balancer is at no extra cost to you. So, but taking advantage of that is very useful. There's also a tool out there called Azure Traffic Manager, and Azure Traffic Manager is, let's say, a load balancer, but it's actually designed to be outside of your environment, right? So it's basically taking incoming traffic from the internet and fronting perhaps a web application or whatever. And the nice thing about Traffic Manager is it's a global service. So you can actually pre-position content all around the world, and Traffic Manager will determine which is the closest point of presence for that particular user and actually redirect them to the proper resource. Very, very cool. Then Azure Backup, there's another SLA we want to talk about, and it's about globally redundant storage. So a lot of clients are using Azure Backup with locally redundant storage, which is basically 3 copies of your backup within one region at Microsoft. A region is multiple data centers. Okay, each region is multiple data centers. So inside that region, there will be 3 copies of your backup. However, remember, I'm not going to show my age probably again. Remember in 2003, we had the power outage here in Ontario that basically took everything down in Ontario. If that were to happen, obviously that Microsoft has, generators and all that stuff, but if perhaps they were to run out of fuel, then you're down, right? Your systems are down. Whereas if you're using globally redundant storage, you could have another set of backups running within the Quebec data center. And Quebec didn't go down in this power outage, right? So we could you could actually access that data from within Quebec, right? So again, there's a cost benefit that you need to go through to ensure that you're spending the money the right way, you're backing up the right things, and using the right type of storage to back those up. Very, very important. Let's talk about operations management. So basically this is about what are we going to do and how do we maintain the environment, right? So who has the functional responsibility of that particular service? We need to actually have this written down. We need to know who is the go-to person, right? What is our life cycle? How long do we keep a certain resource in place before we need to upgrade or refresh that resource, right? Who's managing your source control and automation scripts, right? Who does licensing? So all of these things are things that we all need a roadmap, say, right? That if someone new were to come in and didn't know all of this stuff, this should be written down somewhere, and so that we can actually easily understand who to go to if something were to, go awry. Then we talk about patching, backup, and you can see I keep coming back to backup because backup's a big deal, right? So what's your patch process? Are you using the onboard Microsoft patching tool sets? Are you using a third party? Are you using Microsoft's WSauce? What is it? Are you using System Center? How is it that you're actually leveraging that? And we need to make sure that again, that's something that we need to understand and have written down, right? Are we adding, using Azure Backup? Are we putting SQL extensions into our VMs to ensure that there's security built in? Who's doing the reporting? Where are we reporting from, right? What is it that we're looking for? How do we actually understand how to get to that data? Right. So those are things that we have to think about when we're managing the environment, right? Again, like I know it might sound like none of this is new to you guys, but in reality, a lot of people don't follow the basic rules, right? I think they think that Microsoft's going to be the magic bullet and they're not going to have to actually manage the environment. And that was the big deal when I first started talking about Azure to people was, oh, I'm going to lose my job, yada, da, da, da. And now you can see that if you're following me, there's tools, but yes, you still need to manage the environment, right? There's no question that there's Microsoft will take on some of the responsibility for you. However, there's very much the need for your data center admins to actually work within the boundaries of Azure to ensure that you're keeping all of your services up and running. So this is where I was going to talk about activity log. So everything that Microsoft collects, all the changes that are happening within Azure as a whole, excuse me. And the idea here is that we can go back and actually look and see exactly who did what, right? I know that I've had times when I was an admin and something had gone wrong in my environment and I had honestly no idea who did what. And we know somebody did something, right? But it didn't know what. So the idea was what we can do with the activity log is it basically timestamps a change, what the change was, and who did the change, So who is the user logged in that actually caused that change, right? So you can actually go back through this log and find exactly what happened in your environment. It's very, very cool to be able to do that. You can pull out all of the information into Power BI, and you can see these nice little charts that you have here, right? And see how many changes, what person did the most changes, all of that type of stuff. But it's something that you should regularly review. The idea here is you want to make sure and see who's getting in your environment, ensure that the people who are making the changes in your environment are the people who should be, right? That's a big deal. And we talk about automation. So how are we going to build run books or automation scripts within my environment? What do I use them for? What is a hybrid worker? A hybrid worker basically is what you run the script against, and the hybrid worker actually does the work for you, right? So it'll actually go to a system on your on-premise environment and can run an automation script against that. Or it can do it against Azure resources or even resources in other clouds, right? You basically write the script and it can actually trigger these things to run in other environments. But the beauty of these about the automation is the ability to keep your desired configuration automatically. So if you can get to a situation where your systems have, as I said, veered off, there's been changes to the OS that you really are getting beyond center, you can set it up so that you can have scripts built for desired configuration. So the idea here is that this is where what the desired state of this particular VM should be, right? And if it gets too out of control, I can flip an automation script on so it will bring back and change settings on the OS to bring it back to center, right? Really, really useful. And then again, with the automation, gives you the ability to actually set up a test lab really, really quickly, right? So basically, you have a script built out, laid out, and you can say, okay, I need this many things for this particular application, and it will just roll it out for you automatically. And so it's going to be deployed in 20 minutes rather than you having to build all sorts of things, add storage, networking, and all this stuff, where the automation would have that all built in, and then you can wipe it and then start again when you need to, right? It's very, very important to start getting to this automation layer. It shows that you're actually growing and maturing in the cloud world. The more automation you have, the more mature your deployment of the cloud is. We talked a little bit about log analytics, but here's a little better view, right? So it goes in and it allow you to drill in and understand what's going on in your environment, like which systems have anti-malware on them, which ones don't, which ones are out of date, which network security policies are out of date, that type of stuff. So you can see in the center here, perhaps there's certain issues. There's one critical issue, and it's distinct malicious IP address, right? And so, we want to go in and understand what's going on in here. Each day, I should take a quick look at this to see what's going on in the environment. And it's nice to see at the bottom, you can see this map that actually shows you which data center the issues are happening in, right? It's pretty amazing tool that Microsoft's providing here for you. Let's talk a little about networking in Azure. A bunch of different services that are available. Obviously, public IPs, internal IPs, peering between networks, network security groups, which are basically port level firewalls on your subnets or on NICs, that type of thing. Obviously, load balancing we talked to before. You can have multiple NICs on multiple servers. Virtual appliances, that's where a lot of clients are moving toward now when they're putting like a PAN device or a FortiGate or whatever firewall in the environment. It's one of those things that a lot of clients want to mimic what they actually have on premises in the cloud. So because they already have skill with that particular type of appliance, the idea is to leverage those skills that you already have, right? So obviously there's built-in DNS. You could always use your own DNS, but Microsoft provides one for you. And then multiple ways to do routing, like user-defined routing between peering and passing routes back to your on-premises environment and that type of thing. So a lot of features and functionality in the Microsoft networking world for Azure. Talk a little bit how we can connect securely to Azure. So this is where a lot of clients have a couple of decisions to make, right? So how are we going to actually, what are we doing in Azure, pardon me, and how am I going to connect to it? So if I'm just deploying a connect from anywhere type of service, so it's a website or what have you, right? So a web app that anybody from the internet can actually access. Then I have internet connectivity directly, right? If I have a small environment and I want everybody to log in to Azure, then we can set up what's called a point-to-site VPN for each device. So each device can log directly into the Azure virtual network. But where most of my clients lie is in this third one, which is secure site-to-site VPN. And so basically what that is obviously a static route back and forth between Azure and your on-premises environment. And then so we create user-defined routes to pass the data back and forth. And this gives us the ability to actually now deploy Active Directory in the cloud, or extend a SQL database into the cloud, or whatever would have you, right? So basically with this one, you're actually extending your data center from a on-premises into the cloud. It's basically like adding a branch data center. And that's where I'd say 95% of the customers are. And then the next step is private connectivity, basically express route, which is MPLS connection from your on-premises environment directly to Azure. So you have your own circuit going back and forth to Azure. And that can be from anywhere from, I'm going to say 100 meg, I think that they may have deprecated the 100 meg to 10 terabytes or 10 gigabytes, excuse me, in speed, right? Obviously cost is a major factor there, but the idea is that if you have a critical workload that it must arrive on a certain time and you can't afford the internet variance, then having an express route is the right thing for you to do. So I want to talk a little bit about how the Azure security works. So basically, security is a team event, right? So it's a client teams up with Microsoft and we end up with a secure environment, right? So Microsoft provides the outer layer of security, right? Oh, I got 5 minutes. I guess I got to go faster. Then basically Microsoft provides the public IP addressing, and each virtual network is isolated. So it's basically you're provided a VLAN, right, from Microsoft. Then you apply your NSGs, and the customer would apply a virtual appliance if that's something that they wanted to do. And then on your Azure deployments, you would harden the virtual machine and network access to those virtual machines, right? So it kind of flows down into security layers type model. Then there's a web application firewall. So the idea is we can, this is a level L7 type gateway that actually will determine who has access, what has access, and how to route the access to the various sites behind the gateway. Sorry. And we talked about load balancers, so I'll go beyond that one quickly. This is where what I wanted to speak to is the security and identity is really Microsoft and the customer partner on applying security, right? So there's different models, right? On-prem, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and you can see the different areas of where the customer is responsible for the security and where Microsoft would be responsible with the security or the cloud provider. But you can see the vulnerabilities are reportable, so it depends on where you are on this chart, where the vulnerability is and what it is you want to look out for, right? And again, we keep going back to the same tools, right, to understand what it is and how we're going through it. I'm going to have to stop there, I think, guys. There's a lot more to cover. My timing was off. But I wanted to introduce Karen Skapski, and I wanted her to go through a couple of things that we can help you with. Well, maybe I should just cover this, Karen, before that's just the billing. Big deal.
Absolutely.
Understanding the billing capabilities in Azure, being able to export your billing data into a Power BI is a huge advantage. It'll actually show you exactly where your highest cost items are and gives you a guide to actually start reducing the costs in Azure. Okay. And Karen, over to you.
Very efficient. Thanks, Sandy. Really enjoyed your webinar, by the way, today. So thank you. So hey, everybody, my name is Karen Skapski. I am a senior Microsoft 365 and Azure consultant on CDW's cloud platform team. And I wanted to make the introduction and let everybody know that CDW boasts a team of really highly skilled Microsoft consultants who are technical, approachable, and also just eager to work with you to realize your business goals. So I know that I can speak for the whole team, the whole cloud platform team, in saying that we really do care about the outcome of your projects with us. And you're probably here because you're interested in Azure, but bear in mind that our skills do expand into the 365 software as a service ecosystem too. So we do lots of migration, security and compliance, and collaboration work hand in hand with our Azure projects. So please do reach out to us if you're considering a cloud migration or improving your existing cloud posture. But Andy's brought up a couple slides for you here. So we do provide Azure infrastructure services. Anything that Andy has spoken about during this webinar, we can help you with, whether that's, getting us to be the hands-on people to set it up for you, or having us work with you to train up your team on understanding everything. So we provide Azure infrastructure services. This is just a sample of what we do. And then on the next slide, you'll see we also provide a variety of cloud security services as well. Thanks, Andy.
No problem. Thanks, Karen. And that's it, guys. Sorry I had to skip by the last couple of slides, but I think that we got the meat of it. Are there any questions out there that we can help with? Okay, looks like there's no questions. I think that then we'll wrap it up, guys. I appreciate your time. Please tune into the next webinar. I'm not sure what it is, but hopefully it'll be interesting for you and help you, get work done easier. Thanks very much.